I wanted to do a follow-up video from the first one that I put up the other day because there have been a lot of very cool questions. A lot of questions about the system, what are the things that people are concerned about, what are things that seem similar to other bindings in the market, of course the usual, I don't get it dude, stuff. And so I'm going to try and address some of those. So one of the first questions that's come up is, who is this for? You know, is this for beginners? I've had people say it looks kind of like the Ride Contraband or the Burton Grom, or there was another Burton binding that had like just a single strap system that was targeted towards beginner riders. The answer is no. In fact, we haven't even had an intermediate rider test the system. I have no idea whether intermediate riders will like the system. The people who've been on this are expert riders. We had a guy, Benoit Dargy, who's a World Cup champion, testing this board. I was a sponsored snowboarder for a decade. And you know, a dozen or so other people ranging in skill level from advanced to expert. So that's who's been testing the system. That's who we've been getting the feedback from. That's who we've been trying to please with the system. But you know, we know that probably, you know, they're going to be experts who are not interested, and they're going to be beginners who look at this and go, ooh, very interesting. So that's where we are with who this is for. The next question that I have is, it looks like these things are built out of, you know, a whole bunch of pieces of a whole bunch of bindings all thrown together. That's true. This is a prototype. There's all kinds of stuff on here. Over the 3 years we've been working on this, we've gone from, I don't know, 24 different prototypes. We've got parts on here that are CNC cut. We've got parts in here which are from other bindings that we've pieced together, different bases, different high backs, different buckles. We've had ski buckles on here. We've had different kinds of regular snowboard buckles on the top with the ladder strap coming off of here. We've had bungees to the outside. That's what a prototype is. I've sort of made a career out of putting together innovative ideas and bringing them to market, and the prototyping stage really is a mismatch of getting bits and pieces that resemble what you want the final thing to be, putting them together to create a working prototype, and then once you've done that, you then go spend the money on real tooling and you make the actual parts that you want. So you are correct, these are put together by 1,000 different pieces from 1,000 different bindings to get a functioning prototype. One of the other questions, of course, that we've had is whether or not we need the toe cap over here. You know, why no toe cap? Are you going to get any boot lift? I mean, the front of this boot is, you can see that is not lifting. I mean, it's not lifting. You're getting no toe lift out of this at all. We used to, in the early prototypes, have a cap in there, and you would have to like get your front of your foot into that cap and then go down into the binding and then come across for the closer. And it was complicated to get in. It defeated the whole point of the binding, which was a quick entry into the binding. And so we had two bindings that we put onto the snow to test. Identical setups, one with the toe cap, one without. A whole bunch of expert riders wrote it. And at the end of a 2-week period, it was unanimous. There's no difference. You can't feel the toe cap doing anything. There was no point for it. In fact, nobody wanted to ride it because it was a ball ache to get into. Hey, that looks kind of like a flow binding. Sure. You know, the idea of the flow binding was, it's a great binding. I've owned a dozen of them over the years. I have 2 or 3 pairs now. It's a fantastic binding. The idea of the flow binding, of course, was an alternative to the step-in. Something that's quick to get in and out of, but it doesn't require a specialized boot. You don't have to have the matching boot for the binding as you do with the step-in binding system. And so in that regard, it's kind of like a flow binding, sure. And there's various, you know, GNU has one like the flow as well. And flow themselves have various versions of their own binding. But you know, there's those comments, it looks like something that's already on the market. Flow, something from 20 years ago, 30 years ago. You know, what's different from this? It looks like anything else. Think about that for a second. How many two-strap bindings are there on the market? 300, 400 different two-strap bindings on the market, past and present. What's the difference between one and the next? You ride one binding and I don't like it. You ride the next binding, it's got a chassis, it's got a heel cup, it's got a high back, it's got 2 straps that go over the boot. It's the same parts, but one of them feels great and one of them not so much. The devil is in the details. Just because two bindings at a glance look similar, like I said, you could take a bent metal and you could take a Burton or a Union or a ride binding, and one of them you love and one of them you hate, but they're essentially the same thing. It's a disc with a base and a back, and two straps over the top that you ratchet down, and it's the same parts. It's how they were put together. It's the engineering behind each one of those parts that make it that you love it or you don't love it. And the same goes for this. It's the same thing where you might look at this and go, oh, I've seen things like this that and they didn't work. They probably didn't work, or they didn't work for you. These are different. So how is this different from a flow binding? Well, flow binding is a rear entry, it's a little awkward. When you come off the lift, you can't just be sliding down the snow and stick your foot in and then reach down and flip it up. I mean, you can sometimes, but usually if it's bumpy, the high back's dragging on the snow, you're trying to get your foot in there, and your foot doesn't always go in very easily because it's that part is always here, it's just a little bit looser. And if there's any snow on your boot or any snow inside the binding, and you're trying to get your foot in there, and invariably you come to a stop. I've been using flows for years and years. Invariably you have to come to a stop, you kick the snow out, you put your foot in, you flip it up, and off you go. It's quick, it's easy, it's great. The problems I have with flows is skating. You've got this high back on the ground where you've got to flip it up, but it tends to drop down when you're trying to skate. You've got that latch sticking off the back of the thing. And getting into your flow binding on a steep pitch, if you have to unbuckle for some reason and you're on something steep, it can be tricky to get back in. You have to roll onto your chest basically and get the toe edge in the snow, and you're trying to get that back foot in there and not end up going down something with one foot in the binding. If you're in deep powder and you fall and you're sort of in trees and stuff and you're in waist deep powder and you manage to get back up on your board and you've unclipped, and then you're trying to get your foot in, the board sinking in the snow, and you're scooping snow out of the binding and it's just falling back in because your board's this deep in the snow, and every time you scoop it out it just falls back in and you can't get your foot into the binding. It's complicated. I've been in those situations where it's taken me a long time to get into a binding that's supposed to be easy to get into compared to a two-strap binding. This one here, even if there is snow on it, I mean, you want to brush out as much as you can, but if you have snow landing on it, you can still just stomp on it and close it, and you can ride out. Once you're out of where you are, you can take your foot out, and then you can get rid of the binding, all the snow on it. But just like any two-strap binding, if there's snow on it, it's ideal to get the snow out, but you can strap in with the snow on the binding. You can't do that with any kind of a step-on binding. The boot has got to be clear of ice and snow, and with the flow bindings as well, they're basically got to be clear of ice and snow, or you can't get your foot in unless it's just a tiny little bit. So that's some of the questions that people have been asking about this. Another one, of course, that people have been asking about is, for example, is this going to break? It's only a single strap. What happens if that breaks? Well, think about that for a little bit on a regular two-strap binding. You've got this strap here that's holding your foot in, and you've got the one on the front that's just holding your toe down. If this buckle here breaks, that toe thing is not keeping your boot in the binding. You're coming out. So whether it's this system or it's a regular two-strap system, the entire load is resting on the one ladder strap. Quebec is cold. It gets down to -20, -30 here. And we've yet to have one of these break from the cold. There's a lot of stress on these things. I'm a pretty hard carver. I'm an ex-racer, hard boot racer. So when I carve, I go hard. And in -20, -25, you're out there really putting a lot of forces on these things. 3 years, not one is broken yet. So again, how does this work? You can see now the binding is sitting on the board. I've taken away the riser plates that I had on the first video that I did earlier, which was confusing some people. They thought it was part of the binding. As you can see here now, there's no riser plate. It's just a regular base plate sitting on the board, 4x4 system. How do you get into this? It's really simple. This here, you step in, you take this, you reach over the top, and that's it. And you're going. How do you get out of it? You reach down between your legs, and you're out. So that is the summary of the quick step binding. It's called quick step because it's quick to get into. It's not a step-in binding. Who's it for? It's for the kind of person who is looking at a step-in, who's looking at a flow, who's looking at a GNU, who sometimes there's people who are getting a little bit older, they're a little bit less flexible, they don't want to sit down to put their stuff on, they're not as flexible as they used to be, so bending over, it's tiring for them. There's some, perfectly athletic younger riders as well who have tried this, who've loved it, and they want this. If you're the kind of guy that says, man, I love my two-buckle system, my two-strap system, they're the best, I don't even understand what you do, you're probably not the customer for this, It's not for you, it's not your thing. That's fine. That's why there's 300 different styles out there. This is for the person who's still on their old clicker or on their old switch or something like that, and they won't give it up, They're in flows, but they find the same frustrations that I've found. They're in the new step-ons, and they're tired of having to kick ice off there, or I used to get toe release on the step-on bindings when I rode those from carving hillside calves and twisting, and my toe would come out. I wouldn't come out of the binding. The back is very good on that design. It holds your boot in, but now your toes flapping around and you crash. So that's who this is for. I hope that this has helped people understand a little bit better what this is about. And we'll be bringing this to market hopefully by mid-season. So, without further ado, this is how you would be going off on the mountain. See ya.